Let's get to the story of the day. I contracted Lyme's disease, as well as a few other diseases. I went undiagnosed for several years. By the time I got specialized Lyme blood tests, the Lyme had already caused considerable damage to my body systems. Hashimoto's thyroiditis, Sjögren's syndrome, neuropathy, recurring Bell's palsy, moderate chronic pain, chronic headaches, POTS. A few years into treatment, I began to suffer benign PVCs, or premature ventricular contractions, which were exacerbated by high histamine diets. I was down to around 10 or 12 foods and was in a lot of pain. After thorough testing and monitoring, cardiologists found that my heart rhythm was benign, but it was difficult to live with. Furthermore, I acquired POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which made it impossible for me to remain upright without fainting until around 1 p.m. every day. I was in continual agony and dizzy. I was only able to work part-time and had a low quality of life. I awoke in the middle of the night in December 2015 with an unpleasant heartbeat. It was nothing like the PVCs I'd become accustomed to. I drove myself to the hospital. When I arrived, it had stopped, but I went in anyway and asked to be put on cardiac monitor. Despite the fact that I appeared normal blood pressure, regular heart rate, and rhythm, they agreed. The arrhythmia started shortly after we arrived, and it was dangerous. I went black. They admitted me to the intensive care unit to await 2 surgeries, an angiography to confirm the structural integrity of my heart and veins, followed by an ablation. The procedures were all scheduled for me the same day. I have no recollection of my life before the first surgery. I have no recollection of being in the intensive care unit. I remember waking up after the first surgery, and after a while, because they needed the ICU room and I appeared stable, they transferred me to a regular room to await my second surgery the next day. That night, my spouse and a family friend came to see me. I remember briefly speaking with them when the nurse entered the room. Then, because I could feel the arrhythmia starting, my chest and neck felt a certain way. I was able to predict it a few seconds before it happened. "Here it comes," I said as I faded away. I'm not sure what caused me to pass out. I felt a squeezing sensation, followed by the sensation of snapping out of the top of my head, right where a baby's fontanelle would be. I awoke feeling like a balloon was popping on my skin. It was not painful, it simply snapped. I was instantly at the top of the room, somehow against the ceiling, looking down at the people in the space. I have no recollection of any bodily sensations. I had no idea what a physical body was. I saw a part in my visitor's hair. I'd never looked at that part previously in that light. I could see my husband's and the nurse's faces. I likewise looked at my body in the bed with a detached glance. I knew it was mine, but I was astonished to see my own face. You know how when you look in the mirror, all you see is your own face and not what other people perceive? That was how I saw myself. It seemed like a discarded shell, like when a hermit crab grows out of one shell and discards it. I also remember telling myself that I should have been nicer to myself. I had always loathed my entire package, which comprised my body, attractiveness, hair, and extraordinary height. I was sincerely remorseful for not treating my body with the dignity it deserved. The body was a marvel, an ecosystem in which I should have had more faith and respect. I remember suddenly thinking, while staring at my body, that I needed to be kinder to myself since I was going back in there. The second thing I noticed was that I could tell what everyone else was thinking in the room. The nurse was enraged that I'd been moved to a regular room and believed I should have remained in the ICU. This was fueled by my fear that I might code in this room. He was concerned about my health. My husband, alternatively, thought that I was about to die and that everything was a mistake, that I would wake up in a moment and be well, but not on a psychic level. He was scared that I was going to die and that the shock to his system would have long-term consequences for him. I knew it was going to happen, and it has, he developed cancer within a year. A member of the family was praying. I could hear her prayers. I believe it was a Catholic prayer, similar to the Hail Mary that was repeated several times. Everything is going to change, I sensed or heard a voice say. I don't recall the voice, but the message was clear enough for me to recall it. It was like a single fundamental concept. It was over in an instant, perhaps less than a minute. I have no memory of time passing while I was not in my body. I don't think we had enough time. I felt like I was sucked back into my body when the nurse provided some drugs, and I awoke feeling tremendously heavy, as if I could comprehend the weight of a body. The following day, I had a second surgery without fear of death, despite the fact that the process itself would be somewhat stressful. On the table, they startled me awake, and I could feel and smell my heart blazing. I knew God existed and that heaven existed in certain respect, but it was not a real sight. Things were much more vibratory and intense than I had anticipated, and we were all intertwined like a web, and anything we did here was crucial. Changes I noticed after the anesthesia fog and the horror of the second surgery wore off. It was very stressful being awake while they were shooting adrenaline into my body to induce the arrhythmia, then experiencing the surgeon burning my heart over and over. This may sound strange, but I remember being able to hear or feel what my dogs were thinking. As though they were flowers, I could smell the trees, which were just typical city trees. Each had its own distinct odor, similar to that of a human, but sweeter. This may sound absurd, but I had never considered the tree's consciousness before. I currently have a large number of plants that I treat as if they were pets. I also had a greater understanding of what people needed, what they wanted, and what was holding them back. I could also tell if someone was afflicted with a physical sickness. It's comparable to medical intuition. I'd be able to predict how family members' blood work will look. Every bit of medical news I heard sounded like a repeat. I had a hunch. I suspected my husband had cancer before everyone else, even before he showed any symptoms, and I took him to the doctor for tests. It was as if a psychic portal had opened and I was at a loss for what to do with it. It felt like an attack. I started reading about issues like energy shielding, shamanic experiences, and shared knowledge that I'd never read about before. Everything was unfamiliar to me. Another emotion that evolved was anger or rage. This peaked for 6 to 9 months before dissipating within a year. I suddenly couldn't stand small chat, attending parties, or spending weekends with friends. Their pointless chit-chat made me angry, as though they were wasting valuable time. This irritates me even more. I've always been intense, but suddenly I'm worse. I'd like to meet new people, but not all of them because I can't handle the energy drain that some people produce. And the people I'd like to learn more about, what makes them tick? I need to find out what's going on as quickly as possible. If that makes sense, I completely want to know them deeply. There never seems to be enough time to get to know people, love people, and change the world. I feel like I've blown a lot of time. That was an immediate change in me, and it has persisted to this day. When it comes to driving, I also have a really short fuse. I was so frustrated while driving that I didn't drive for about 6 months. I handed over the keys to my spouse. When I was forced to follow behind a sluggish walker in public, I grew outraged. I felt like I'd squandered so much of my life not doing what I was supposed to accomplish that I couldn't afford to waste another minute, so being stuck behind someone trudging along in a store angered me enormously. Things have, thankfully, improved. Witnesses to this wrath were perplexed. They couldn't understand why I wasn't grateful to be alive. I had avoided a potentially catastrophic heart rhythm. I should be grateful simply to be alive. It was a mystery to me. Why couldn't I just be happy? I also turned off a lot of my intuition since I don't know how to cope with it. I can close it and reopen it if I wish. It's presently shut down. I didn't believe it was an NDE since I didn't see a tunnel, a blinding light, or any deceased family or guardians. But as I began to investigate what was wrong with me, I realized I had had an NDE. I couldn't believe it for a long time. In the 3 years since my NDE, I've written a book which was published by a big publisher, and I'm currently working on 2 more books which I hope to have published shortly. I still teach on occasion, as I did before my NDE, but I connect with my students in a different way. I am more remote one-on-one, but I care much more that we, as teachers and students, make the most of our time together. I used to worry about whether or not certain individuals liked me, but I no longer do. That is extremely liberating. Despite the fact that I did not experience a tunnel, a bright light, or a life review, my NDE had a significant impact on me. Funerals no longer make me melancholy. I'm not bothered by the prospect of death. God is something I comprehend. I have amazing psychic abilities, and some of my Lyme illnesses seem to have vanished during my hospital stay. Disorders like POTS and Sjogren's that an ablation cannot explain. It could explain why my POTS had cured if I had had documented heart problems, but I had previously only had benign PVCs with a perfectly normal heart, as evidenced by stress tests, echoes, Holter monitors, and EKGs, until my cardiac episode. POTS plagued me for 7 years. I never anticipated an autoimmune disorder like Sjogren's to go away, yet it looks to have done so. I'm not at peace with my life since I still believe I'm intended to do things I haven't done, but I'm aware of how significant this is and have adjusted my life plans accordingly. I'm still not in the mood to socialize. They deplete me. I'm grateful for my NDE, even if it shook my life and was difficult to accept for a while afterwards. My intuition was correct. Everything shifted.